Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and today I want to do a little bit of a comparison between what you're looking at right now, that being Painkiller Black Edition, and the Serious Sam games from around that same time period. I find that among the first-person shooter community, Serious Sam and Painkiller often get compared, and in rather strange ways, at least to me. I'm mainly referring to the gameplay. For example, I often hear Painkiller described as mindless, and while on the surface, Serious Sam would definitely have a bit of an advantage when it comes to how much you gotta think, it's not quite that simple. I want to start with just covering the general gameplay between the two games and how they're different. You see, fundamentally, Painkiller is not the same kind of game as Serious Sam. Yes, they do have a couple things in common. They're fast-paced for the most part. They don't really take themselves too seriously, although one has a very different tone than the other as far as the art direction and music goes. They both have you dealing with hordes of enemies, and the similarities kind of end there. The main argument that I hear against Painkiller and as to why it is a mindless shooter compared to Serious Sam, which in of itself also gets described as mindless sometimes but not as often, is the relationship between the enemy health numbers and the weapons that you have. While it's true that Serious Sam definitely has a much more colorful variety of different weapons that you need to use against your enemies in a way that counters their strengths so that you overpower them, that's not to say that Painkiller doesn't have something similar. Yes, you generally are just going to be using the shotgun in Painkiller and the stake gun. Those are your workhorse weapons. You've got a lot more, although I'm not going to be showing them in this video, seeing as this is the particular level that I chose to record. I really like it. But even with just the free weapons that I have available right now, there's still a lot of depth and strategy when it comes to choosing which one to use. So the shotgun is basically your all-arounder. It does decent damage at medium range and really good damage at close range. Its rate of fire is a lot faster than a lot of other shotguns, and ammo for it isn't too scarce, although you will see me run out a couple times. And then when that happens, you gotta resort to the stake gun, which is actually one of the more unique weapons of Painkiller, and it takes advantage of the game's physics engine, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The stake gun is far more accurate and will be your go-to for long-range attacks when you have nothing else that can do long range, and it actually can be more effective against certain enemies than the shotgun by simply, well, piercing through them and nailing them to the wall. And as for your melee option, you've got the Painkiller, which is what I'm going to use as a sort of segue into talking about the melee in Painkiller and how much better it is than Serious Sam's. While the chainsaw can be pretty satisfying, and surprisingly enough, the knife is actually quite an effective weapon, both of them can feel a little bit unreliable, especially the knife. While the Painkiller, I've almost never had an instance where I would use it and end up, taking damage unfairly. The animation on it is buttery smooth, and you get some really good feedback when you grind into the enemies. And you can also detach its head and use it as a sort of projectile. That brings me to the overall weapon feel and the feedback from hitting enemies. Similar to Serious Sam 2, Painkiller uses this sort of ragdoll physics engine whenever you shoot an enemy. And what's interesting is that even though in Serious Sam 2, I'm not really a huge fan of the way it's implemented, whenever the enemies don't get jibbed, that is, but in Painkiller, I just can't imagine the game without it. It adds this viscera and whole-bodiedness to every single shot, and it feels even better when you jib them and all of their parts go flying in different directions in accordance to the physics. I think I know what it is. In Serious Sam 2, oftentimes whenever an enemy enters its ragdoll, it doesn't really go anywhere, it just kind of flops around. It will sometimes flinch a little and get sent like a couple feet back, but in Painkiller, enemies get sent flying like across the map oftentimes when you hit them hard enough, especially when you use the stake gun and you see them just fly towards the nearest wall and just get like boinged off of it. It's just so satisfying. As for the enemies themselves, although they might not be quite as, I'd say, iconic as Serious Sam's enemies, and they aren't quite as varied when it comes to different strategies as to how you would avoid their attacks, that's not to say they're just mindless mooks that move towards you. They still have totally unique attack patterns and are even able to inflict status effects on the player. For example, in this level, you'll notice these Grim Reaper looking dudes, not the ones I'm killing right now, but these other ones that have these staffs with bits of red smoke coming out of them, which choke you once you walk into it. There's also these mages that can disable your weapons for a while, or these other similar looking Grim Reaper guys that can slow you down with green gas. Painkiller even has multiple kamikaze-esque enemies in the game, like these guys holding explosive barrels in the catacombs, or in the asylum level, there's these guys in straitjackets that electrocute you and can pretty much one-shot you if you're not careful. But unlike kamikazes, they move a lot more slowly and can almost be sort of stealthy, like they almost act like jump scares sometimes, but you know where they are thanks to the radar at the top of the screen. And speaking of avoiding enemies, the deciding factor as to why I actually prefer playing Painkiller, even though I do find Serious Sam to be a much more charming and likable series, is the movement, and specifically the bunny hopping. You can reach some insane speeds in this game by rhythmically tapping spacebar, and it puts you in this state of flow that I just can't compare to any other shooter of its kind. There's plenty of other arena type shooters where you move quickly, but you usually move fast on your own. Here, if you want to move fast, you've got to do the bunny hopping, which might seem kind of annoying, but there's something just so inherently rewarding about getting that speed boost every time you hit spacebar at just the right time. It's become so ingrained in my muscle memory that once I fire up almost any other shooter, even if it's not an arena type, I just find myself spamming the jump button in the vain hope that it'll make me move a little bit faster when usually it doesn't. And I have not a single doubt in my mind that this is the main reason why I find this game so satisfying to play. It's much more of a twitch shooter, I guess you could say. It doesn't really fit in that category of what you would typically describe as a twitch shooter, but it does require really fast reaction times and it rewards speed. And you know me, I love speed. Something else I love is being immediately rewarded for doing something in a game. And in this case, Painkiller's soul system fits the bill perfectly. It's extremely simple. You kill an enemy and a little soul pops out of them. And the way that it looks, the sound that it makes when you collect it, and the fact that you get a little bit of health back is just that dopamine rush you need to keep the flow going. It also has a very arcade-like quality in the sense that if you collect enough of them, you go into this like demon mode where you get to just destroy everything with one shot. Some people complain that you don't get to activate it on command, but it does actually give you a couple warning flashes. What happens is when you're about to transform, but not fully, your vision goes black and white for just a little bit, then it goes back to normal. And it happens a couple times, and on like the third or fourth time, that's when you fully transform. So if you want, you can just avoid them. The souls take quite a while to materialize out of the enemies, so it's not like they're unavoidable. Another sort of video gamey quality of Painkiller is the tarot card system. They are essentially upgrades to your character that you unlock by completing levels under certain stipulations. They are far from essential unless you're playing on the hardest difficulty, but they are a neat reward for going the extra mile, even though some of them can be a little bit obtuse to get, I must admit. The final thing I want to talk about is the brand identity between Painkiller and Serious Sam, and this is where it becomes clear which of the two brands is a little better managed. So as I said, I adore playing the Painkiller games, but by that what I really mean is I love Painkiller 1 and Battle Out of Hell. The rest of the expansions are rather notorious for just not being up to snuff. Now, Gaming Pastime has a great series covering all of them and actually showcasing the fact that they're not complete train wrecks except for one of them. I'm not sure if it was Resurrection or if it was... No, it was Resurrection, definitely. That was the one that was an absolute buggy mess. But overall, I feel like the Painkiller IP is just a little bit mismanaged, especially with the HD remake that was lacking so much content on launch, and even after all the DLC, still lacks content compared to the Black Edition. On the other hand, you got Serious Sam, which has received faithful HD remakes, sequels that for the most part are quite good, and even a bunch of spin-offs made by third parties, but with Crow Team's support. Aside from that, Sam as a character is just more iconic. I mean, he's likable, he's funny, he actually has character to him. I don't even know the name of the guy that you play as in the Painkiller games, honestly. The only thing I know about him is that in the remake, he's voiced by the same guy who does Duke Nukem's voice, and that's pretty much it. I guess it helps that the Serious Sam games are just overall much more lighthearted in tone. Not that Painkiller takes itself seriously necessarily, but its dark color palette, really eerie and ambient music alongside the metal riffs when you're fighting, as well as its combination of century-old design languages like Baroque and Medieval and Classical and Renaissance and all those things, make for the sort of image that just seems a little less approachable. That's not to say that the Painkiller games can't look good. I mean, I specifically chose this level because I adore its aesthetic, and the Opera House level, when it opens up and you get that huge reveal of the stage in the arena, is just breathtaking, man. Let's wrap this up. I want to make this clear that I'm not taking sides. I love both Painkiller and Serious Sam, and while I do believe that Serious Sam overall has the stronger presence in the gaming landscape, when it comes to just the individual game, I do prefer Painkiller for the reasons that I mentioned. The faster movement, better weapons impact, and I mean, good old-fashioned metal riffs, right? They're kind of forgettable, but they get the job done. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Vivid Noise, and I'll see you at the next one.